Hi, everyone. Welcome to Skills Training. This is Sonya, and I think David's going to hit the record button for us. Well, I'll wait to see that happen before we get going too far, but hope everybody's having a great night.
Hey
Um,
guys.
Good to
Sorry.
see everybody. And we're actually filling in for Bethany tonight, and we're going to tag team this. David and I are going to do that together, and she had, this is our first skills training since baby Avalon's been born, and she's just done so incredibly well, but was really wiped out today and getting rested up from all that transpired. So thanks for being patient. And okay, awesome. The recording is on. So I'm so glad that everyone is here tonight. We're going to talk about really an amazing part of skills, which is telling your story. Bethany referenced it a little bit last week. We're going to dive in just a little bit. We're going to use some prompts and some things that we've heard before, like from Eric Worre, but there's a few other things that have kind of come to light recently that I thought would be super fun for us to do. I know a lot of you have your cameras off and maybe you're doing multiple things, which is totally fine. But if you can get a piece of paper and pen out and ready to take notes, or to kind of dialogue back and forth, even as we go through this, I think you're going to get more from it if you can be a little more interactive. So an effective story. This is a craft. This is something that we can get better at. I've recognized through the years that, good storytellers practice, and we almost sometimes think of storytellers as people that exaggerate, make something very large and maybe not as rooted to truth. That's not what we're talking about tonight. We're talking about literally rooting in deeper into the truth of you, your story, your personal power, and what you have to give to the world, and how that's going to impact you in every single way, not just in business, but in your whole entire life. So the first number one, an effective story, we're just going to do a little groundwork. An effective story is personal. And I love this because the story doesn't have to be all about you, that you're going to be crafting, especially talking about this Young Living story. You could be highlighting the person that enrolled you in Young Living. It doesn't have to be about you, but there is a connection to you, and tapping into that is really crucial. And I was thinking about when I first got started, and I think maybe we all have this kind of thought in our mind when we first get going. We think, well, my story is not that, like grand yet. I'm just getting going. Like I'm having this energy for a couple of months, but I'm new, or my paycheck doesn't, look like a diamond paycheck. How am I going to talk about the business? And one of the ways that this happens is by attaching to the people that we know and love, that connected us to this Young Living journey, by telling their story. And our part in it is even our admiration for how they got going, how they were persistent. I was thinking tonight, just in my own story, it was years of not being ready to take something natural for my thyroid. Years of me thinking this couldn't, I was scared something would shift and something would change. And what if so the fact that Bethany stayed connected, and obviously I'm her mom, but we can do this for people, right? That's part of our story, is our tenacity, our care, our love. But when I'm talking to people and they're not ready, I identify with that, and I talk about Bethany and how she didn't give up on me. That's really relevant, right? So whatever you're talking about, somehow woven into that is your story and how it's connected to what you're highlighting. Number two, it has to be clear. It has to have a clear goal. What do you want the outcome to be? If you can define what you want from this. Now, this is tricky because sometimes we're talking in conversations and we might think 4 steps ahead would be the goal of having that person enroll in our team. We might be thinking 4 steps ahead, but could we kind of maybe rein it back in and really make a goal and write a goal down in front of you on your piece of paper? What would be a clear goal for you just having a dialogue with a friend? If you're at a coffee shop and you're talking one-on-one, most of the time it's not going to be, I want this person to enroll. It's going to be more about, I would really like to be a good listener for my friend. I would like to hear, really to hone in on what she wants to accomplish with this conversation, and that's going to determine what you're going to, it's going to determine how you say what you say. So if you hope to get her, if it's at that point where you feel like him or her are, if they're ready to say for that ask, then maybe it is that you're going to want to have someone join you and enroll with the premium starter kit. That's going to dictate what you say, because not every conversation is going to end with that straight up ask. You're going to gauge that depending on what you want the outcome to be. Now, even though you want that to be eventually, this conversation in the present, the story you're telling in that moment might just be, I want to really adhere my heart connection to this person. I really care about them. That's what's on the forefront of my mind. And if the other things fall into place and the steps go faster, then great. All right, number 3, it's tailored to a very specific listener. And if you haven't heard Bethany's training on this before, oh my goodness, I can't do it justice, but I just wanted to say how much that impacted me when I heard her describe her ideal listener. And I want to pause here. Even if you're doing this mentally and not on a piece of paper, I would love for you to give 3 words, at least 3 words that describe your ideal customer, listener, the person that you are inviting to your team. I want you to just 3 words. And I'm going to give you a little insight into mine, and maybe that will help spark some imagination and creativity. So I'm going to ask myself the question, who influences my ideal person? Who influences them? Who do they listen to? And for me, my person is middle-aged, and my person is looking for redemption. So one of my words is redemption. My person is looking for redemption in health, in finances, maybe even spiritually, in relationships, but redemption is a theme. And I would say that my person is open to learn. And not to be rude, but my ideal person isn't somebody that's closed. My ideal person is not someone, I'm not trying to speak to everyone. David, can you interject here what you said to me earlier on that front? I don't know if he heard me.
Remind me. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. We were talking about honing in your ideal person.
Well, I said if you try to talk to everyone, you actually talk to no one.
Yes. Okay. So let that sink in. That's why we're kind of curating in our mind this ideal person. It's not that every person in your team and in your business is going to be that. It's that in having a very clear vision for the person you're talking to, the clarity comes for you in your story. The clarity of your story takes shape. You aren't scared. You're not sanitizing it so much that nobody can identify. So if I'm talking about menopause, and I'm talking about middle age and the things that happen during middle age, and how we deal with ourselves and how we look in the mirror and have to be okay with all these things, I know in that conversation that the 27-year-old isn't going to identify with that specifically, but I'm being really authentic and vulnerable in what I'm dealing with, which will also still adhere that connection with her. She knows other people who are 52, right? And I know other people that are 27. And somehow in that transference, there's this authenticity that is so present and real that it's admirable. All of us have things about our story that maybe we want to shove it down a little bit, but that's literally the thing that is the winning magic for all the conversations, no matter what age, no matter what you're talking about. The authenticity of what you've been through, how you can see through your story, through your circumstances, and see how it connects to the heart of another person. That is just where it's at. So when you're thinking about, okay, so that was 2 for me. Hopefully you have 1 or 2 or 3 things written down about your ideal person. And your ideal person, again, it doesn't have to be somebody just like you, but the values are going to be present that are important to you. That's part of how your culture builds in your team. It's you knowing who you are and who you're talking to inadvertently starts to build the culture of what you're looking for. It's going to resonate. Really, so true. So all of that has to do with it. Okay, so a specific audience. So number 4, well informed. A very good story. How did I say it? Not a very good. An effective story is well informed. This is where we're going to add the facts. This is a little bit of the teaser of your experience with essential oils on this is how I felt, and I have been using this Young Living product for X amount of time. Now my experience is this. This is where you start to see the veracity of what you're saying. So some people can go a little overboard here and grandiose their story to the point that that authenticity piece gets lost. And people read through it and say, oh, I don't know, you know, and I've even said, and you probably have too, if you're telling your story, it's okay to say, I know this sounds crazy. I would have thought it was crazy had I not experienced it. Like, identify with the fact that if you have this amazing, miraculous journey happening, it's okay to identify that it sounds like a lot, because it is for you. We can also talk about the science side. We can also give those facts briefly about, hey, I know you've probably heard about all these studies that are being done about frankincense. Like, drip in the content. You're not having to give the facts, but you're referencing that there are facts. That's going to be really key to the sturdiness of your story and people believing you and listening to you. You don't have to be the expert. You don't have to have the degree, but you have to know where you're referencing actual legitimate truth, right? So, and obviously we want to stay compliant. So get in front of the mirror and start to practice words like supporting your body's immune system, like helping your body gain balance, hormonal balance. Like, you're going to always talk about that aid and that support, so that you're not just gutted when you're in front of talking to people. You're not just like, oh, I don't have words because it's not compliant. And when you're in a lot of people at once telling your story, you can get better at that. You can get better at what is actually you're getting exactly everything across that needs to be gotten across without crossing a line. And that's a beautiful convergence. We've all done it where we've been like, oh, so don't feel bad if you've done it. I know our hearts are to be compliant on that. But all right. And then number 5 is clear and focused. Clear and focused. And as you can imagine, this has been a hurdle for me. Clear and focused, because a really effective story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It is not as fluid as the ocean and the river. It is not jumbled up like my brain gets when I'm talking to people. Sometimes I just get all over the place. So if you can start to practice that story of and that's why we did the template in our group last week. This is how I was feeling. This is what I started using with Young Living. This is the amount of time that I used it. And this is how I feel now. If you can start to just, at every time you're talking, have a beginning, a middle, an end, and maybe even a call to action at the end, you're going to get better and better at weaving, no matter what story you're telling. Because let's be honest, we all have multiple stories. I could talk about the menopause story. I could talk about the Lyme story. I could talk about the homeschooling story. I could talk about the middle-age story. I could talk about financial story. We all have so many stories we could be talking about. Every single one of them has, in our delivery, has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And once I started to try to think like that, it became a little better, which leads me to the very last one, and that is concise. It helps you to stay concise if you know what the next point is going to be. You already have it. It's not that it's rehearsed, it's that there's a template, and you're filling in the template, and you can be inspired. And it can be a completely different delivery than it was 2 weeks ago, based on the inspiration, but you're still sticking to the template. And so I think that in some ways makes it easier for you to say yes to sharing, don't you think? It allows you, because you're not going to be caught off guard. It's not that it's rehearsed, it's that the template is set in place. So here's what I thought we would do tonight. And we are going to use that little template that we talked about last week that Bethany referenced. And that is, so I want you to write down on your piece of paper, we're going to do a fill in the blank, just like we were in school. And I want you to write down at least a couple of sentences or think about them. My experience was, and you're going to fill in a little bit of that blank. So I'll do this with you so that you are not on your own. So you're going to pick one story, one area of your story. It could be, we could use Bethany as an example. She could be talking about her birth story. She could be saying, I was, 40 weeks pregnant, and and so whatever you want to focus on, we're going to choose one thing. And I will go with I'll go with thyroid. So previously I was dealing with major sluggishness in the afternoon, zero energy. Okay, so that's my very first sentence, just one sentence. Previously or before, or I have been dealing with, and you're just going to fill in that blank. We're just building the template. So this is past. Number 2. Then I started using Young Living Thyromin and Endoflex and Progestins Plus. So you're going to pick one thing, that 1 or 2 or 3 things that you use to address that first sentence in sentence number 2. So get that down. It can just be chicken scratch or in your head. Number 3, I used this for 3 weeks, and all of a sudden, a light bulb, an on switch turned on. Mental, everything changed. So we're going to start. How long did I use it? Well, I'm still using it, but I was only using it for 3 weeks before I recognized something shifted. So it'd be great if you could weave in a time element. That way you're giving that hopefulness that it's not that I've just been doing it for 2.5 years. So the difference is I could say, hey, I had some weird 17 years of thyroid troubles, and energy just waning. It was awful. But for 2.5 years now, I've been using Thyromin and Progestins Plus. That story's lacking because I didn't give them that really key piece. I used it for blank amount of time. In 3 weeks' time, I knew something had shifted. So make sure you put that time element in there if possible. And then last but not least, now my experience is I'm 52 and I've never felt better. Better energy, better clarity, hormones balance. I feel great. So you're ending you're gathering up all the pieces to this moment of, it's like the biggest aha blessing that you can give them, because whoever you're talking to, this is what it's all about. This is what they want to know. And they know if you don't believe it to be true. They know if you're making up words. They know if you're just blowing smoke. You can't fake that. You can't fake it. So the zeal and the excitedness that you have in your heart about your story is everything. And then last but not least, there at the end of that comes this question in your mind. Okay, now that you have your story, you've told your story, we have to circle back to that very, I believe the second or third question. That's this: what did you want to accomplish with this? Because this is going to determine how you end your story. Because your story could be, it could be just that you're wanting to make sure that person has the facts, but you're wanting to know, have you ever experienced this too? Don't forget to weave in the questions amidst your story. So if I'm saying, oh my goodness, there I was, homeschooling 5 kids and I was falling asleep in the middle of the day. Has that ever happened to you? It's a conversation, it's a story, but it's also there's an obvious option for you to talk to the person that you're in front of, instead of just regurgitating the template, you're at every step possible, you want that engagement back. Yeah, I've had that too. Oh my gosh, I totally feel you. It's so normal because that's in conversation what we do. We care about each other. So don't forget to ask questions amidst your story. And then at the end, you're going to determine if this is a good spot for you to say, hey, are you ready today to get started? Is today your day to get started? There is nothing wrong with you making that clear, direct ask with your story. If you're giving the story, especially if you're in person, especially if someone is dialoguing with you and they keep the dialogue going, you're on Facebook Messenger, they're asking a question and you're answering, and then you're asking a question and they're answering, and then you have this going back and forth. Don't just let it trail off without asking the very obvious point. Are you ready to get started? That is a point that I really feel like that was a growth for me. I think being comfortable with the ask means you also have to be comfortable with a no. And so maybe do a little check in your previous conversations. Have you just kind of hinted and wanted them to ask for it at the end? Or are you really making it very easy and very clear with your story? Your story is the most powerful tool you have. It's the absolute most powerful thing, because it's nobody else can tell your story. It's yours. The dynamic nature of it, again, because I could retell your story, but without your energy and your spirit behind it, it's going to sound different. It's going to be different. So that is just the magic. Oh, thank you so much thank you, April, for putting that in the comments, because I didn't type it out. All right, number 3. Yes, she got it, I think. So let me just go over another one time. Number 1, an effective story is personal. An effective story has a very clear goal. Number 3, an effective story is tailored to a specific listener. Number 4, an effective story is well informed. And this is where you're going to do your data, your facts, your anything you want to put in there about, oils and PubMed and all those things. Number 5, an effective story is clear and focused. And number 6, an effective story is concise, which I haven't given you yet. And concise is really important. And I'm not the queen of that yet, but I'm working on it. I'm doing better than I was. Clear and concise. The clarity will help you be concise. That's what I've learned. If you can get the template down, you have your let yourself be guided, let yourself be able to be inspired. It will be able to be more succinct. It's just the rambling that gets us long. That's all it is. Once we're clear on it, we can be fast. So that's what I have for you. Let's make sure there's not any questions here. I'm excited because we have our slice of pie number 3 that's going to happen tonight. Bethany, she's probably even going to post it in about 5 minutes in Leadership for OQ in the Units tab. You're going to find your number 3 slice for easy as pumpkin pie. And the story part, that's this we've been working on this. Hopefully you've already been working on it, but the story part of this, I'm going to say, and I think if she was here, she would say the same. Find a partner, a person in your team, or that you don't even know. Find somebody even here, or if you already have a partner with the slice of pie thing, right? We all have partners. So tell your story to each other and get really honest, good feedback. Ask, was it engaging? Were you interested? Did that pique your curiosity? Like, ask the really hard question, and don't be offended if somebody says, you know what, it's a little bit pedant, is a little bit, predictable. It's okay. And be brave enough to tell somebody if it sounds too predictable. Help the person, help the person, your partner, become a little more interesting. Because we can all, because when you're starting with a template, it cannot, right? Because the first of our sentences are all the same. So it's going to be helpful for you to kind of figure out that rhythm, so it's not quite as 3rd grade. All right. Yes, she's got it now. Thank you, April. Anybody have questions about your story? We've literally got 5 minutes Anybody have a question about your story? About, um, is there something curious about your story that you don't have clarity on?
I've got a question for you, Sonya.
Yeah.
In your daily work as you're trying to build your team, what are some situations where you are telling your variations of your story? Where does that happen?
Mm, that's a good question. I think that is why it's important to write out lots of stories and label them. Thyroid story. Okay, I'm using myself as an example. Thyroid story, hormone story, homeschooling story, traveling in a bus story, married to the greatest man on the planet story, those kind of things. So I'm going to reference those stories as people ask the questions about, oh my gosh, y'all traveled in a bus? What was that about? Okay, boom. There's my story. Oh my, I love telling this story because it's crazy. Yes, for 5 years, we drove around the country and sang in churches and schools. And, it was such a curious time. And I give about 4 sentences, boom, boom, boom. Have you ever thought about doing something like that? Always circle back to a question. Your story is not just for you to hear yourself talk. Your story is for engagement. And the same with social media. And some of you are just like, some of you are so good at this that you really should be doing this class, but I'm mom, so I'm just filling in. But you're really good at that engagement side. So telling something about you, but then ending with the question. That's where it's at. Does that answer it?
Yeah, it really does. Can I mention a couple things?
Please.
Okay, so there's a saying, and it may be a book in the direct selling industry that says stop telling and start selling. And you referenced this, but I just want to say this, I know when I first got started, I was so focused on my story that I just couldn't wait to run up and tell somebody my story. But we really have to do this well, we have to hear about 10 of their stories before we even start to tell ours. So I just wanted to circle back and say that. And then the whole point of the story is so darn effective for keeping people's interest and connecting human to human. And that's why we talk about this. The greatest communicators of all time are storytellers. And so it is a skill that I want to get better at. And I know probably everybody on this call does.
Yeah.
And then I just jotted a couple notes here. Go ahead.
No, please. I'm all ears.
When you and I first got into direct selling, we had a mentor who said, at the end of the day, the only thing that matters, the only matters how many people you told your story to. And that has stuck with me because that's really it. You can talk about your campaigns and all that is to get a chance to tell that story,
That is so true.
to tell it personally. And if your enrollments and even your team's belief and everything is all wrapped up in how well and how connected you are with the story and how well you can convey it to others.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It's so true. And we can do an audit on ourselves. How often are we telling our stories? And it's going to look, obviously it's not going to be always that template in a dialogue on Facebook Messenger, but there's pieces of our story and their story. As we're telling our story, they're telling their story. And it's more like this dialogue. Don't forget you're still telling your story. And how many times can you tell it? How many times? Because if people are asking you questions about anything, there's a story for you to tell. Anything. If you post something about a weird thing about you and somebody asks you a question about it, take that baby to private message and tell that story and ask about theirs. It's so important.
And even if they're not asking the question, blatantly, you can read between the lines. And in this business, one of the most common things people say is, I just don't know what to do. How many times have our parents asked us, what do you guys do? What do you do? Because we're not a fireman or a dentist, what do you do? We tell stories. And that's comforting to know that you can recenter on that when you have that moment in your business. Oh gosh, what do I do? Tell a story.
Right. That is so good. We can even, and honestly, we can do that if you don't know what to do in your business. Like if you have a lull, if you sit down and you don't know what to do, open up your private messenger and start asking somebody a question. You start the conversation. And then secondly, you can tell a product story about a product. Like it doesn't even have to be that you've used it. Sometimes I'll just get out. I'm like, oh my, I don't know. So what product do I not know a lot about? Ooh, AminoWise. I don't know a lot about AminoWise. Dive in, tell a product story, learn something about AminoWise. Do like you there's always something to be done, right? Keeping yourself inspired enough to do it's where it really falls into the sweet spot. All right, let's make sure there's no other questions. Can you guys elaborate on how to end it as far as making it your end goal? Please, I could use an example of this. Okay. Well, honestly, it depends on how much engagement, if we're talking about speaking with someone or messaging with someone. If we're messaging with someone, once I have given like the nuts and bolts of like, hey, the best way to get started is with this premium starter kit, because you're going to want the 24% discount for the future things that you get. So let me just ask, is now a good time for us to talk about this? Are you ready to get started? Anything like that, anything where you are not making it weird to, like, in other words, you're referencing what they've already been talking about. I hope that's what you're asking. I hope I'm referencing what you're asking about. But hey, I'm just curious. Are you ready to get started? I would love for that to happen today. How
Well,
can we?
I think in the beginning you said to have a very specific thing that you're trying to accomplish. I think that might be what she's asking. How do you
Oh, and how to wrap?
make sure that you end that as far as making your end goal?
Oh, maybe knowing what your end goal is. Well,
And
I'm
then bringing that story to a point where you're actually likely to
how to
accomplish.
wrap up your story, she says. Okay, he or she, I don't know who this is, but how to wrap up your story. Well, if you're telling your story,
No, Galaxy.
what?
It's Galaxy.
It's Galaxy. It's a beautiful galaxy. Um, if you are telling your story, then Amber, if you're telling your story, there's a reason you were telling it, right? So if this person, let's say you met at the park, you don't know them, and you're sitting there chatting, your kids are playing together, and they're like talking about fatigue, and you're like, oh my goodness, I've had this happen too. I was diagnosed with this thyroid thing like 17 years ago. And I mean, I don't know if that's what you're dealing with too, but it's pretty severe, man. There's no tired like that. So that's one little part of your story that you started telling. And it depends on how long they have. Are they saying something back after you're sharing that? After you're keeping that intrigue, like, I'm so glad I'm not dealing with that now. How are you doing? You're continuing to gauge whether or not it's okay for you to go further. Because we're not just going like, we want to be socially mature here and not, some of these relationships, just meeting at a park is going to be different than me calling up my sister and saying, hey girl, I'm doing this thing and you want to do it now, you got to get on now. Today's the day. For her, I'm not even waiting, I'm just like telling. But the closer you are with someone, the more latitude you have in that way. If I've just met them, I might just say, hey, let's connect before I leave. Are you on Instagram? Making the connection might be the first goal if you don't know them. Does that make sense? And that's a really fine goal because you want them to just see your stuff and you see theirs. Okay, we are 4 minutes late, so we got to run. Thanks for hopping on, everybody. Check out Leadership for OQ for Slice of the Pie number 3. And I'm sure Bethany will be back in place next week. Thanks for joining in. Right here in 10 minutes, we'll be hopping on for our autoimmune oils and autoimmune. It's going to be great. Samantha's going to come in and share with us. So we'll see you there.